Hilchos Metam'ei Mishkav Umoshav Perek Achad Asar. The laws of those who transmit impurity to things that they lie on and sit on, chapter 11. We're continuing from yesterday the topic of the Am Ha'aretz. The person who is not so careful about Torah and mitzvahs doesn't know the details of purity and impurity, so the sages put upon him a default status of being impure. Today, more or less, the chapter is going to be about the situations where an Am Ha'aretz is believed. Even though typically they have a baseline lack of belief when it comes to purity and impurity, there are certain situations, certain times of year that they are believed. That's pretty much what we're going to be discussing today. The Rambam says like this, Halacha Aleph, Kvar Be'arnu, we already explained in the last set of laws, two sets of laws ago, in the laws of Para Aduma, She'amei ha'aretz ne'emonim hein al taras paras achatos. That even though Am Ha'aretz are not really believed with regards to purity status, but when it comes to the purity of things related to the Para Aduma, there they are believed. Mipnei chumrasa ein mezalzelin ba. Because of its severity, they don't treat it cheaply. They know, even if they're not careful all the time with Tuma and Tara, when it comes to Para Aduma, yes they are. Which part exactly of Para Aduma? So either we're talking about guarding the water of Para Aduma, or just in general, that their utensils are kept pure in relationship to Para Aduma. What do we do about the fact that they're not familiar with the laws of Para Aduma, with the laws of Tumah V'Tara? So the commentaries say, when it comes to Para Aduma, they always ask advice from a sage, from a Torah sage. They always get the proper guidance. V'chein ne'emonim hein al taras yayin v'shemen shel nesachim. Also, if we go down a level, not just chatas is the Para Aduma stuff, but even when it comes to things that are meant to go on the Mizbeach, any wine or oil that's meant to be used for libations accompanying a sacrifice, they're believed about the purity status. Im amar toherhu hareze b'chezkas tara. If the Am Ha'aretz says that it is pure, then it's treated with a presumption of purity for the same reason. Mipnei chumrasai nizharin bay. It's severe. Things that are going to go on the Mizbeach, they know we're not going to touch. We're not going to get involved with the questionable things. So they're always very careful. The Rabbi explains, why does the Rambam give his own reason of chumrah? Because yesterday when the Rambam introduced the idea of the impurity of the Am Ha'aretz, he said, cheskas tuma. They have a presumption of impurity. That means that it's not just some kind of takana or some kind of enactment, it's a literal presumption that everything surrounding them is tamei. So the only thing which could undo that is if you have a cheskas tara, if you have a presumption of purity. And the presumption of purity comes if you know that they treat something severely. If they treat it severely now, as the Rambam himself says, b'chezkas tara. Now there's a presumption the opposite way around. No negative presumption, only a positive presumption. V'chein, and similarly, if we go down even another level, ne'emonim hein ala truma, they'll even be believed to declare the purity status of truma, bishas hagites v'habadim, at least during the time when people would press their grapes and press their olives. Mipnei shekol ha'am mitaharin atzman ukleyan, because at that time, everybody, kol ha'am here means every individual, would make sure to purify themselves and their utensils, to be able to produce their wine and oil in purity. Even if you didn't keep purity all year round, but you know that if you want to sell your stuff, your wine and your oil, it has to be pure. Otherwise, nobody's going to buy it from you. Therefore, even the less observant people would make sure to purify their clothing, themselves and their utensils to be pure. And therefore, during that time, even an Am Ha'aretz is believed. Avru hagites v'habadim einan ne'emonim. Once the time of pressing passes, then they're no longer believed. And they're no longer believed not retroactively. They're no longer believed going forward. So if any of the wine or the oil is left over from now on, then they're no longer believed about the status. So basically what do we have over here? If we look at this chart on this side, the actual liquid or the actual materials, if it's Para Aduma, they're believed. If it's Kodesh, related to sacrificial stuff, they're also believed. If it's Truma, they're typically not believed, except during the press time. When it's time for pressing, then they are believed. The second column we'll get to soon. Halacha Beis, Kohen, or some Rambams like you have the word Ella. In other words, it's a continuation to the last halacha. Once the press time passes, they're not believed. Ella, rather, Kohen shehevi le'am ha'aretz chavis yayin neshamen shel truma. If a Kohen is sitting at home and an Am Ha'aretz comes to him with a barrel of wine or oil and he says, hey, this is truma, now that it's no longer the time of the press, so he's not believed about the status of purity. Lo yekablena mimenu. If he wants to treat it as pure truma, he cannot take it from him. Because now it has a presumption of being impure. And the commentaries say if he wants to take it as impure truma, that's fine. There's a way to treat impure truma. But if he wants to accept it as pure truma, he cannot take it now because it's not the time of press, so they're not believed. But interestingly enough, if the Am Haaretz were to leave it by him till the next time people are pressing wine, at which time he's again believed, and now he brings the barrel, the Kohen could take it from him. Even though he knows it's last year's stuff. Because that's the bottom line. Sages didn't decree tumah during press time. So even if it's from last year's press time, but if he brings it in this year's press time, it's okay. By the way, even though the Rambam phrases it in what's called b'di'evet, as if like after the fact language, truth is, we'll actually tell the Am Haaretz. If the Am Haaretz brings it to the Kohen, not during press time, the Kohen should tell him, hey, take it back home, keep it till next year, and then bring it back, and I'll be able to take it. Halacha Gimel, Am Haaretz shenoal beis badoy oigitay, b'shah shegamru ha'am lidrech. Let's say, again, the Am Haaretz, when they were pressing wine and oil, they wanted to make sure that it's going to be accessible to more Jews. So they would do certain things to be more stringent. So let's say you have an Am Haaretz. Most people already finished pressing their grapes and oil. He didn't. That's how the commentaries explain. He didn't fully finish it. So he locks up his olive press or his wine press. And then he brings the key to the Kohen. He says, look, I'm not finished yet, but I want you to have the key. You be in charge. You supervise my stuff. So now, even if he waits multiple days after the press time passes, which typically he shouldn't be believed, but since the Kohen had the key right at the end of the press time, the Kohen can come, open up the wine press, have the Am Haaretz go to the mikvah so he becomes pure, and he can watch him press the grapes, and the Kohen can take whatever comes out of that as truma, and he can consider it to be pure. Because clearly there's no way that this became impure since the Kohen had the key the whole time. But if he didn't do that, he cannot take the wine as truma from the Am Haaretz, because again, it could be that it became tameh. All he can take is raw materials, the oil and the grapes, not susceptible yet to becoming impure. That means no liquid even touched them yet, because they cannot become susceptible to impurity. And as the commentaries point out, in this case, even if the Am Haaretz will leave it to the next year press time, if he didn't give the key to the Kohen, he won't be believed, because we'll consider that wine or oil to have been processed in a state of impurity. In the last case, in Halacha Beis, the wine was processed during the press time, during a time of purity. Therefore, if he brings it to the Kohen will say, hey, leave it till next year. But in this scenario, leaving it till next year is not going to help. There's another side question the commentaries deal with. How could the Kohen take oil and grapes as truma? We learned in the 7th book, when it came to the laws of truma, that oil and wine is a different material, halachically, than olives and grapes. You can't take truma from olives and grapes for the oil and the wine. So how does one cover the other? So one explanation in the commentaries is that the only reason the rabbi said not to take truma, olives and grapes, to cover oil and wine is because we don't want to bother the Kohen to produce the oil or the wine. But if the Kohen is asking for it, then that's fine. Another explanation is that no, when the Rambam says take the olives and the grapes, he means that the olives and the grapes will only cover olives and grapes. It won't cover the oil and the wine. Anyway, halacha dalet. Hevi le'am haaretz chavis shel truma b'shar yemais hashana. An Am Haaretz brings a Kohen a barrel of wine during the rest of the year, which means that he shouldn't be believed, right? Because truma only during press time is believed. If it's not during press time, it's not believed. But here's the clincher. The Am Haaretz says, Hifrashti b'soicha kodesh. I set aside some of this barrel to actually be used for sacrificial needs. Afilu revius, even if it's a tiny amount of just a revius. What do we say about kodesh? Kodesh, they are believed. So if the Am Haaretz says part of this barrel is kodesh, because he's believed over the status, the purity status of the kodesh part, so he's believed for the entirety of the barrel, even the truma part. Now this creates an issue because now you have truma and kodesh mixed up. And kodesh you cannot have benefit from, so how will the Kohen benefit from the truma if it's mixed with the kodesh? So the commentaries say, Tosfos actually writes this in the Gemara, that the case is where the Am Haaretz says, I committed to setting aside. I committed to setting aside part of this barrel as kodesh, and then we have what's called breira. Breira means retroactive clarification. When you separate the revius of kodesh, now it becomes clear that that's the kodesh part, and the rest is truma. So once the kohen separates them, he'll be able to benefit from the truma. Afilu b'shas hagitis v'habad. Now, says the Rambam, another law, even during the time of the press. Sha'am ha'aretz ne'emonin ala truma, when typically an am ha'aretz is believed over the status of truma, that's only for the liquid itself. If they come with an empty container, they're not believed to say that the empty container is pure at the status that it can contain truma. Nor are they believed ever about an empty utensil to say that it's holy enough for sacrificial meat. So while the liquid they have belief, this is second column now, empty container, truma no, and also kodesh no. Halacha hey. We have a utensil with wine or oil. And we see an am ha'aretz sitting and guarding it, not because it's already holy, because he wants to make it holy. It's clear that his intention is to make it used for libations. So what did we say about kodesh liquid? If it's already holy, they're believed. Here it's not yet holy. And if it's not yet holy, one could say that maybe we should treat it like an empty utensil about which he's not believed. Says the Rambam, no. Since it's going to become nisachim, so it's as if kodesh is mixed in. Same way in the last halacha, when kodesh is mixed in, he's believed over the whole thing. So here too also he's believed over the purity of the utensil, because it's as if there's kodesh inside of it. Even if it's 70 days before press time. But if it's before 70 days, then they're not believed, because nobody's preparing their utensils. No am ha'aretz is preparing their utensils to be pure so early in advance. But Medvarim Amurim says that Rambam, when do we say that they're not believed about empty container status with regards to kodesh? Bishar Eretz Yisrael, only in the rest of Israel. Avol b'Yerushalayim, but if it's in Jerusalem, things are at a higher level over there, and we'll soon see why. Ne'emanim al kli cheres hareikam loymar shehu tor lekodesh la'ilam. If it's an empty pottery utensil, they're always believed to say that it's pure for sacrificial meat. Bein kelim dakin, bein kelim gasim, whether it's thinner utensils like pots and cups and jugs, bein kelim gasim, whether it's thicker utensils like a barrel, bein melein, bein reikanim, whether they're full or empty. Harihu neman ala kli, he's always believed about the status of the utensil, afal pisha hamashkin shebesoichet tmeyin, even if the liquid inside of it might be impure. Afilu haya bigdai sheho midras besoicha kli, even if his clothing, which is always considered to be midras, a high level of impurity, is inside the utensil, we can assume, we can presume that the utensil is in a state of purity with regards to sacrificial meat. What's the reason that the sages were lenient when it comes to Yerushalayim? Interesting reason. Because there were no, what's a kivshan? Kivshan is where you fire up the pottery utensils. It's called a kiln. It's a massive oven, exactly. And they didn't make these in Jerusalem. Why? Because they are very smoky, and we wanted to honor the sanctity of Yerushalayim, which means that there's not a lot of pottery utensils accessible. So if we're not going to believe the am ha'aretz about them, it's going to make it very hard to keep the purity status. And the sages said, we never make a decree on a community, Elohim kain, yechelin lamoid ba, unless they can stand up to it. And in this case, the community won't handle it. So we'd rather be a little bit lenient on Kli Cheres and Yerushalayim and believe the am ha'aretz about their status. Halacha vav, not just in Yerushalayim itself. Min ha-moidiis v'lifnim. Moidiis is actually a code name for Modi'in. Okay? So here's Moidiin, here's Yerushalayim, and from the area of Moidiis and inwards, and I guess the entire radius as well, Ne'emanim al Kli Cheres. From there already they're believed about the status of pottery utensils. Min ha-moidiis v'lachutz, past Moidi'in, eina ne'emanim. They're not believed. V'ha-moidiis atzma, the actual area of Moidi'in, pa'amim kelachutz or pa'amim kelifnim. It's treated sometimes like outside and not believed, sometimes like inside and believed. Ketan, what does that mean? How do we explain that? If a chaver is traveling inwards towards Jerusalem, and an am ha'aretz is leaving, and he's holding a pottery utensil, we will believe him in Moidi'in to say that it's going to be pure for sacrificial meat. If they're both on their way in or both on their way out, He's not believed till they reach the area inside the Meidiyas, and then they are believed. Halacha Zayin Kadar. You have a potter, and the commentaries explain that it's referring to an Am Haaretz potter. Shehevi Kedeirais v'hinichan lifnim min haMeidiyas. He brings a bunch of pots and he puts them down inside the area past Meidian, which means that he's believed at that point. Ubo haloikhin, and the buyers gather around, and he says they're pure. Lokach kedeira v'nichnas ba. If a chaver purchases a pot and then goes into Yerushalayim with it, we'll believe him to the extent of sacrificial meat, but not to use it for truma. Lokach kedeira v'yatza ba chutz lameidiyas. If the chaver bought the pot and leaves outside the meidiyas, it's now impure for everything. Even though it's the same pot and the same potter, the believability only happens inside the area. Once you leave outside the area, you got to treat it as impure. If somebody buys pottery utensils straight from the kiln, anywhere, even outside the meidiyas, they're fully pure, both for sacrificial meat and for truma. And we don't say over here that the Am Haaretz touched them, because they haven't been fired up yet, and they're not even susceptible to impurity. Even if he takes from the first row, these kilns were very big. They had a bunch of utensils inside them. So you're buying from the first row, that's the outermost one, most exposed, most vulnerable. Or even more so. Even if the kiln is open and half of it was already bought out. What does that mean, half is bought out? That means people are already touching stuff. Doesn't make a difference. The rabbis never decreed impurity over utensils that are inside of a kiln. So that's it. If you're in there, it's a safe zone. And therefore it's always pure. Halacha tes, another exception. Tumas am haaretz beregel, kitahara hi chashuva. The impurity of an Am Haaretz on holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, is considered like purity. They lose their status of being impure. Shekol Yisrael chaverim hein baragolim, because all Jews are considered chaverim when it comes to the holidays. Ukleim kulam v'ichleim umashkeim tahirin beregel. All their utensils, all their food, all their drink is considered to be pure on Yom Tov. Mipnei shehakoil mitaharin atzman, because everybody purifies themselves, and then goes up to the holiday. I'll soon point out a very interesting point here that Rambam says hakoil, doesn't say kol ha'am, like he said in the beginning, so just shelve that for a minute. Therefore, even Amei Haaretz are believed all the days of the holiday, bein ala kodesh, bein ala truma, whether for sacrificial meat or for truma. Misha avar haregel chayzrin letumasam. Once the holiday passes, they go back to being impure. But it's even worse than before. In the case of Gitos v'Habadim, the press time, it's only going forward. Once the press time is over, they're not believed going forward. Here, we're going to see in a minute, it's not even believed going backward. It's only a special thing during the holiday days. Let's see it inside, and then we'll explain why. A person opens up a barrel of wine, or opens up a dough for sale, and then the holiday passes. Whatever remains in the barrel, whatever remains from the dough, is now considered back to being impure. Not because going forward there's a problem, because during the holiday Amei Haaretz touched it. And even though during the holiday they were pure, now they're looking backwards, they're no longer pure, so we can't use it. Even though, when did the Am Haaretz touch it? During the holiday when he was considered to be chaver. It's only considered pure during the holiday. And again, in a minute, I'll explain why. After holidays, on the day, literally, Matzei, the holiday, besides for the individual problem in the holy temple, everybody was there, they used to put into the mikveh all the holy utensils. Because Am Haaretz touched it during the holiday. Now, during the holiday they were pure, but looking back, they're considered to be impure. Therefore, they used to tell them, don't touch the table when they would show it to those that came for the holiday. The Gemara talks about this. They used to take out the shulchan, the menorah. It's a very rare occasion. On holidays, everybody can see it because most people weren't allowed inside. They're not kohanim. They would take it out and show it off. But they would tell Am Haaretz, don't touch it. Anything else you can touch, because we can put it into the mikveh. The shulchan, we'd rather not. Why? Because that will cause that it should become impure after Yom Tif, which would require it to be put into the mikveh and wait till sundown. Now, what's on the shulchan? The lechem apanim, the showbread. What does it say about the showbread? Lefanai tamid, it has to be in front of me always. If you're going to force the table to go to the mikveh, it means there's going to be a time when there's no lechem apanim. So they would purposely tell the Am Haaretz, don't touch it. The chol hakelim hayutunin tvila, the harif shemesh, all the utensils in the temple had to be dipped into the mikveh and wait till sundown, chutz mi mizbach hazav or mizbach hanacheshes, except for the inner and outer altars. Because the coating, even though the coating is metal, but the coating is nullified. It's subservient to the core of it, which was wood or stone, not mekabel tuma, not able to become tameh, and therefore they wouldn't have to put them in the mikveh. So here, there's a fascinating sikha from the Rebbe that he explains this concept. If an Am Haaretz is pure during Yom Tif, so why should he be considered impure retroactively after Yom Tif? Like during press time, he's considered pure. Afterwards, it's a new impurity. What's with the Yom Tif thing that only during the holiday, but afterwards, it's retroactively impure? So the Rebbe brings a bunch of suggestions from the commentaries, but spends a lot of time explaining why they're not enough for the Rambam. And the Rebbe introduces his own approach, a very interesting approach. If you look at the Rambam's precise language in Halacha Tes, he doesn't say that every single person necessarily goes to the mikveh. He says, Mipnei shehakoil. In general, Jews would do that. Or Kol Yisrael chaverin heim b'regalim. All Jews have a general status of being a chaver. Which means, as the Rebbe explains it, that on holiday, when you come to the Beis HaMikdash, a yachid, an individual, stops being an individual. He becomes subsumed, part of the identity of a tzibur. And the tzibur, the community at large, doesn't become impure. Once the holiday is over, that special sense of community goes away. Everybody reverts to being an individual. This specific individual, Am Haaretz, very well may not have made himself pure, even for the holiday. And therefore, we have to assume that he's impure. And more on a mystical level, the Rebbe says, in Yom Kippur, we say in the Torah reading, Hasheichin itam b'seich tum eisam. Hashem dwells within us, even when we're impure. But that's because we have a status of tzibur. If every individual were judged alone, so if a person is impure, he's not deserving necessarily of Hashem's special treatment. But because you're part of the community, you're uplifted, you're elevated, you assume a new identity, and you're no longer who you are individually. You can become bigger than yourself. It's incredible. Halacha Yud Beis, the last halacha here. Am Haaretz she'amar, if an Am Haaretz says, Tahir ani mitumas meis, you should know, I'm pure from corpse impurity. I don't have corpse impurity. Or he says this utensil is pure from corpse impurity. Neman, he's believed. And we put it in the mikveh, just treating it as if it has the other level of tumah of Am Haaretz, which is like a zav. It only has to be left to leave overnight, not to be sprinkled with para aduma water. Right? Because if it's tummy with corpse impurity, so you got to wait 7 days, and you have to sprinkle it with para aduma water. Since he said it's pure from corpse impurity, so we only take into account the other level of tumah. When do we say this? If you asked him and he specifically said it's pure. But if you simply take a utensil out of the domain of an Am Haaretz, who we do worry that perhaps it is corpse impure, and therefore we have to, before you use it, you have to sprinkle on it on the third day and the seventh day, like any utensil which is found anywhere outside of Jerusalem. Because in Jerusalem there's no decree of impurity, as we'll explain in the next set of laws when we deal with all the doubtful cases of impurity. But outside of Yerushalayim, we do have to worry, so we do the para aduma procedure on these utensils.